So today we're going to be making our art portfolios for class. So you'll need one sheet of poster board, a stapler, and your name in whatever font you choose from dafont.com. So now the first thing that you're going to do to make your portfolio is take your poster board and fold it very neatly in half, matching up the corners nice and even. And then I like to go back and really crease that edge really well. Then you're going to have one long side that's open and two short sides that are open. And we're going to be stapling along those two short sides. So with a stapler, you're going to staple as close to the edge as you can and putting a staple about every 2 or 3 inches going all the way up that short side. And that should just take about 5 or 6 staples going up the side. Then you're going to repeat that on the other short side as well. Then you have your completed portfolio. Now you should have the opening at the top of your portfolio and the fold line at the very bottom. Now to start working with your name and your fonts, we're going to do a quick review. If you remember learning to write in elementary school, you probably remember seeing a 3-ruled line like this, where you have the sky, fence, and ground line to show you the capital letters, the lowercase letters, and where the bottom of all of your letters landed. We're going to use a similar format for that today to create some guidelines for ourselves for this project. Now my font is a little bit of a bouncy font where the letters don't all line up perfectly, so I'm just going to give my best estimation. So I'm going to create one line across the top for my skyline, my tallest letters, and then where the bottom of my lowercase letters land, or at least most of them land, I'm going to create that bottom line. Notice some letters do go below that and some are above that, but that's a good estimation for my particular font because it sort of bounces up and down. Then I'm going to create my middle line for the lowercase letters where at least most of them land with the top part of them. Now, you want to take a look at the ratio between the top section and that bottom section. That's going to be really important whenever we start on the next step, which is creating those guidelines on our big paper. Now you can decide where you want your name to go on your piece of paper. You can break it up into 2 lines or put it in just 1 line. That's going to be completely up to you, but I think I'm going to break mine up into 2 lines. So on my paper, very, very lightly, I'm going to give myself a nice guideline for where I want the top line of my first name to go. And I'm going to do this super light so I can erase it later. Then I'm going to guesstimate about how far down I need for that middle line to be, just sort of eyeballing and estimating, and then creating that same thing with the third line. Trying to keep in mind those proportions for the spacing to match what I'm seeing in my font that I've chosen. Now for my last name, I'm going to break it up and put it on a second line over on the right hand side. So now I'm going to repeat that same step, and I'm going to actually take the measurements from my top lines and transfer them down to my bottom lines, so that way my first and last name are the same size. That's going to help keep everything really nice and consistent. And the most important thing about this step is making sure that you get the proportions right and that it's drawn extremely lightly, because these lines will all get erased later. Now, if you've decided to put your first and last name on one single line, a great trick that you can do is to take the beginning and end of your name and fold that in half, and that crease line is going to show you where the center of your full name should be. Then on your poster board, you can guesstimate the center there, and that's going to really help you know where each letter is going to start in reference to that middle point, so that way you have enough room to fit the whole thing. Now for our next step, we're going to create a very loose sketch to help keep the sizing consistent for all of our letters, so that way they don't trail off and get too little or scrunched at the ends. Now you want to make sure to hold your pencil really loosely, because you want to be able to create very light, very sketchy, soft lines for this part. This step is going to just help you figure out the blocking in stage for the size and the estimation for where each letter needs to go. So this step should not take too terribly long. You're just trying to very quickly map out to make sure things will fit once you start to add details and things to this later. There's nothing worse than taking a lot of time and really carefully drawing out details, only to find out that everything is in the wrong place and it needs to be shifted. So this first pass is a very quick, light sketch, no details, just quickly mapping out the size, where the angle of letters, if they're leaning to a side, are, and the width of them, the height of them, where they come up to and down to on each one of those lines. Just a very quick once-over pass. That way, you haven't invested a lot of time, but you can really quickly see if the proportions are right. One really important thing with art, especially like when you're learning to draw, is that you want to work from general to specific. So you don't want to spend time doing details yet until you're sure that the structure, the big stuff, is kind of blocked in correctly. So that's a really quick once-over pass. I don't have any details. It's just a quick, simple, very light line sketch. And I'm going to check and make sure that the height and where the letters line up matches my reference image. Now once that looks good, I'm going to move down and speed through this even faster and block in my last name. Now, since I want to be really careful that my last name doesn't run off the edge of my paper, I'm actually going to draw this one from the right to the left and sort of work backwards. This is going to be a great trick to make sure I don't run out of room on the other side of my paper. So just very, very quickly following that same thing. I think this whole process took me maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I did not spend a lot of time on it. I just really like to think about this stage as sort of a rough draft. There's going to be changes that happen later once I've got this part blocked in, which is why I'm really emphasizing that these lines are very light and very sketchy. That's going to give me a lot of flexibility to shift and move these letters later on as I make better comparisons and more accurate comparisons to that original reference image that I'm working from. And so once I have that blocked in, I'm going to do one more final check, just walking my way through each letter very carefully to make sure that things line up where they should line up based on those guidelines. So now that I have the blocking in complete for both of my names, I'm now going to get to move on to our step 4, which is adding the details and really defining each letter. So really getting them just right this time. So this is sort of my final pass. I'm going to very, very carefully go through each letter, paying attention to the subtle curves and the turns, trying to really capture this as accurately as I can to that original reference. Now notice I keep my image right next to what I'm drawing because that really helps me look back and forth to check the accuracy of my sketching lines as I'm going. My lines are still very light. I'm not drawing very darkly yet because I'm still going to be making changes and adjustments as I go. So you can see just as I'm working through with this letter, I might adjust and change the angle or the tilt just to really get it as close to the original as I can. So the whole time that I'm working on this, I'm really looking at where the reference is to the guidelines, how close does a letter intersect with the guideline. I look at the negative space in between the letters, the open space, the white space in between different angles and things like that, because I'm going to make all sorts of very subtle adjustments, and you don't want to be tied to a single line and be unwilling to move it and change it. Really just be willing to make subtle adjustments and shift things, because the more comparisons you make, the more you look at it, the more subtle changes you make, the more accurate it's going to become. Another really important thing, depending on your font, you really want to pay attention to consistency of the thickness of your letters. So my font has wide sections and narrow sections, and I want to really make sure that I'm matching what I'm seeing. So now that you've seen me sort of slowly block in that first letter, I'm going to now sort of speed this up in a time lapse so you can see how I go about blocking in each one of these letters. Now, I spent a long time on this part. I really took my time. I was very patient, drawing very lightly so I can erase and make adjustments as needed. So this time lapse is just simply a way of me saving time in this video, but just know, don't rush this step. You really want to slow down and take your time and really get it right. This is very, very important because we're looking at this. This is all going to help your craftsmanship and the accuracy and the overall nice, neat quality of your portfolio. Now, once you get this part complete, you want to really go back through all of your letters one last time, look at your resource image, and really check all of those comparisons just to make sure you don't need to make any final adjustments. And once you're really happy with it, and I've checked it myself, you can go through and erase all of your extra lines and really tidy everything up. That way you're ready to move on to our next step, which is adding color with markers or colored pencils.